Marvel canceled movies
I
last
also
minute.
think that Marvel is on this journey now of they're trying a bunch of other stuff, and I'm excited for them to see how all that goes, and
Hopefully it goes
it's
good,
hard
man.
to project.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie.
You wanna
James
see
Gunn
Marvel
just did
do
a
good all
recent
the
interview
time.
and revealed a bunch of Marvel movies and TV shows that Marvel quietly canceled back when he was poached by DC to become their new Kevin Feige, and he started rebooting
Mm.
the DC universe with the Superman movie, all the new stuff over there. I'd heard rumors
And
about a
they're gonna
couple
be
of the
cooking
things
over
that he
there.
mentioned that had been canceled, but he confirmed everything. All of them sound like they would have been super cool, so we'll break it all down. Why Marvel canceled them, what they're doing with those characters that would have been in those movies. So if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to
Oh,
subscribe to get everything. This is really just the tip of the iceberg. Marvel's canceled a whole swath of things in the last couple of years. But it is CCXP weekend as of me posting this video. There might be a few big trailers. Whatever they wind up releasing there, of course I will do videos for. The first big canceled movie was a Star-Lord movie called The Legendary Star-Lord for Chris Pratt.
bruh.
It's basically what the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 post-credit scene was meant to set up, with him leaving the Guardians team to
Come on
Rocket
now.
and going
How
back
gonna
to Earth to
cancel
visit his
that?
grandfather.
Star-Lord?
During that actual post-credit scene, they joke about his
Back in my
grandfather's stepson,
head.
who's also an adult like Star-Lord, but has been living with his grandfather and his new wife before he shows up to reunite with him. There are a bunch of jokes about how mundane and awkward things are at the home, with him eating the kids' candy breakfast cereal like he's still that same little kid who Yondu yoinked back in the 80s.
Hmm.
He just happens to be way, way larger now because he's in his 30s. But things are meant to be normal. Like, that's the whole vibe of the post-credit scene, is that things are back to normal. The whole joke of the newspaper his grandfather was reading was meant to be a reference
Kevin
to
Bacon.
Kevin Bacon being yoinked by Drax and Mantis for the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special prior to the events of Guardians
We need a
3.
holiday special
And he's
this
just
year
joking
too.
about how his new adult cousin, I guess, the woman's adult son, just stands around the house acting creepy, doing nothing all day, while
Hmm.
Star-Lord mows the lawn and does regular chores that like a normal little kid would do. During the very end of the movie, right after that post-credit scene, it says, "The legendary Star-Lord will return." So the idea is that it's meant to directly set up the Star-Lord movie, which they would have done next, because he's always
Mm.
been calling himself the legendary Star-Lord, but he's not legendary at all. Like, he's legendary as being a huge doof. The way
Hmm.
that James Gunn explains it, he talked to Chris Pratt after DC hired him a little while ago to reboot their universe, and Chris Pratt got James Gunn's blessing to do whatever he wanted with the Guardians characters now that James Gunn was gone. A lot of people asked him about this when it first
Damn,
happened,
bro. That's a big
because
loss,
James Gunn's
Loki.
DC contract won't allow him to write or make any more Marvel movies or TV shows, basically work on anything that's not a DC movie. So the idea is that if Chris Pratt wants to do more Marvel movies for his character, or any other Guardians characters for that matter, or any other solo projects, he has to work with new people at Marvel, like a new writer, a new director, if he wants to do it. Which it sounds like he does. Like, he's still trying to get his own projects going at Marvel without James Gunn.
I
And
mean,
James
someone
Gunn
that
was
can write a
saying that
good
it's
movie
totally
though.
cool with him for them to do whatever they wanted. This is like the opposite of someone like George R. R. Martin, who's like very intensely about staying on top of the creative for all the different projects that HBO is doing based on his Game of Thrones, which, apropos, thank you to Game of Thrones Legends for sponsoring this video. It's a puzzle
Game of
role-playing game featuring
Thrones.
epic-based PvE and PvP battles with tons of collectible and upgradable champions based on everybody from Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. Pair up
Damn,
with
that's bad.
allies, your friends, equip iconic weapons based on those seen in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. You can play as all the main characters from both all
Alright,
series, like
to the
and fellow
video.
Crownland friends. 50 of Guard Earth-based movie would have been mostly a crossover set around Earth with a combination of Guardians characters and other Avengers characters, the way that the Marvels movie tried to combine an Earth-based plot with a more space-based plot because of all the Skrull stuff that was going on. James Gunn didn't say who the villains of that Star-Lord movie were going to be. There'd probably be another new space-based villain, and it sounds like it would have been someone we had not seen in the MCU before, not like an old character coming back. He did say that Annihilus was almost the main villain of
Annihilus.
Guardians of the Galaxy 3, so he might have been saving
Mm.
Annihilus for the Star-Lord movie. All the Annihilus
Maybe.
deleted scenes
Maybe
and
not. We'll
storyline were
never know.
originally that he would have been the person who created Rocket, not the High Evolutionary, so he basically replaced Annihilus in the movie. I think because it just made more sense with the whole Adam Warlock subplot and the whole concept of the Sovereign
Forgot
Race
all
just
about
being
Adam
another
Warlock.
creation of the High Evolutionaries that he kind of abandoned once he started creating Adam Warlock, who was supposed to be his ultimate super being. If you have not read the Annihilus story in the comics, he's an old school, deep cut Fantastic Four villain from another universe called the Negative Zone, a place that they featured in the 2015 Fantastic Four movie. They've used him in a bunch of Fantastic Four animated series in the past, but never in live action. He's basically a bug creature that gains sentience and uses the cosmic control rod to conquer his Negative Zone universe, then leads the Annihilation Wave to try and conquer the main Marvel universe. The major reason
You should
James
put
Gunn was trying
villains
to
in
introduce him in his
Marvel
Guardians
Universe.
movies
I don't know
is
if they
because
are.
he was behind
I
the
mean,
huge Marvel
Marvel
line-wide
Rivals, I think.
crossover event called Annihilation and then Annihilation Conquest, and that's the crossover event where his Guardians team in the MCU formed for the first time. So Annihilus was just connected tangentially to a lot of what he was already doing in the MCU. For example, Adam Warlock was also briefly on that particular Guardians team during the Annihilation event. Even though Kevin Feige canceled that Star-Lord movie, he did say that he's happy to keep bringing Chris Pratt back for more Marvel movies and shows until he doesn't want to come back anymore. So at least right now,
I mean,
the
they
next
did a
place
really
we'll
good
see
job,
his
so
character is during
might as
Avengers
well.
5 Doomsday, maybe Secret Wars somewhere. Not everybody in Avengers 5 is also going to be in Avengers 6. It's going to be similar to the balance of
They'll
characters
probably
between
kill some
Infinity
people
War
off,
and Endgame,
to be
where not
honest.
everybody was a huge character in both of the movies. Next big canceled movie that he revealed was a Rocket and Groot team-up movie. James Gunn said he
That
was
could have been a little
originally going to
series.
make this between Guardians 2 and Guardians 3. Like he was going to make it instead of Guardians 3, then eventually a couple of years later he would have done Guardians 3. The weird thing is that he said that the people at Marvel, he was mostly talking about Kevin Feige, like the other big producers, convinced him to make Guardians 3 instead of doing Rocket and Groot, probably because the powers that be at Marvel thought that they could earn more money on Guardians 3 than they could on a
Yeah.
Rocket and Groot movie. Like, no, we want the money movie first, then you can do your other smaller movie. He'd actually talked a lot about this
Could have
Rocket
done a
and Groot movie a
series
couple of
on
years
Disney
ago,
Plus
too.
about
Like,
it.
this has been a big thing for him since he started doing the Guardians movies in the first place. It was mostly going to be a prequel story about how the two of them met for the first time. We got a little bit of that story set up during Guardians 3. Like, we didn't see the story itself, but we got some more clues for what actually was going on during that period. During those Rocket flashbacks with the High Evolutionary showing how he was created, he slowly rebels against him, then steals the ship and escapes his base while he's still very young. He would have eventually found a younger version of the first Groot, remember this is the original version of Groot, on a different world, who had a backstory similar to his original comic book backstory. The reason why Groot was off by himself, not with his race, is because he'd been exiled by his race because he refused to kill a human, and the council that ruled over his people deemed it a treasonous act against all Groot kind. They become bounty hunters for hire together, start earning money until eventually they take the Star-Lord bounty by the events of the first Guardians movie, and that's how they meet the rest of the team, as we saw during that first film. The reason why he was going to do that instead of Guardians 3 right after Guardians 2, he said is because he always was more interested in Rocket to begin with just as a character. Even though all the Guardians movies feel like ensembles, he said he's always viewed Rocket as being the real main protagonist of all the Guardians movies. And the prequel
Kind of
movie
him
was
and
meant to set
Star-Lord
up Guardians
be
3,
the
which
main
would have delved
character.
even further into Rocket's backstory, but he was pretty clear on the fact that Guardians 3, as he did wind up making it, was meant to mostly be a Rocket movie with the Guardians in it. But it's why there was that huge gap in Rocket's backstory during the movie where like you just see him take off from the High Evolutionary, but you don't really see what happens right after that. Basically leaving him the room to do that Rocket and Groot movie in the future, but that was
He was
before
getting
he'd been
ready to
hired by
cook.
DC when he was still planning on making that movie.
Wonder what they
James
offered
Gunn
him
also said he was totally fine
that
with
he
Marvel
left.
and Kevin Feige exploring that story without him. But the funny thing is, the way his contracts with those original Guardians movies work, because he created those characters, there are some technical aspects to that, like some legalese, that allows him to retain some rights, and they'll have to bring him on as a producer if they do any more movies with those characters. The closest
Well,
follow-up that
GG's
Marvel
for
is
that.
doing to all that stuff right now, instead of a direct Guardians 4 sequel, would be just bringing Rocket's Guardians team back in Avengers 5 and Avengers 6. They'll continue to operate in space-based Marvel movies like
He might
crossovers,
get
future
cooked.
movies instead of other direct sequels. Most of them will return. Maybe not every single character eventually, but most of the characters will return. But the next
Whoa,
big cancel
group.
thing James Gunn revealed was a Ravagers TV show, which would have been set forward in the timeline after the events of Guardians 3, maybe some flashbacks too as well, just to show sort of the origin of the actual team itself. But the show would have been based on Gamora's version of the Ravagers. She wasn't leading the Ravagers at the end of the movie. That was actually meant to be Starhawk's character, who was in charge of the Ravagers after Yondu died. There was this whole subplot with the Guardians 3000 and Starhawk's original Ravagers team that Yondu was part of, based on the original Marvel Guardians comics, because the more modern version of the team that James Gunn introduced in the first film was actually based on a later Guardians roster. He actually said this is why he spent so much time developing the Ravagers as a group just in general, all those characters in the Guardians movies. They're a huge group now in present day, but there's this long history that they just would have delved more into during the Ravagers TV show. Some of you also probably figured this out, like in the background, you can read the writing on the wall. The major reason why Kevin Feige canceled all of those movies and TV shows is specifically because James Gunn left Marvel, and he was really the creative driver of all that stuff. The whole idea is that Kevin Feige was really more interested in James Gunn's creative output and the stuff that he specifically wanted to do, like, we just want to be in the James Gunn business, just whatever you want to make, we want to make that. Marvel, Kevin Feige less interested in the characters specifically themselves. Like, he enjoys the actors. Kevin Feige likes all those actors, thinks that they're good, but they're not 100% necessary for all the billions of other movies that he's thinking about doing the next 10 years. All because most of those movies are X-Men based films, the Mutant Saga, Fantastic Four stories, mostly totally new characters and IP that they haven't been able to do before for legal reasons, which now isn't a problem anymore. Deadpool and Wolverine was meant to be the first taste for that. Probably one of the funniest things he said, though, this isn't Guardians related, but he did say that when he got hired by DC, one of the first calls he made was to Ryan Reynolds and asked him to come back as his Green Lantern, just as a joke.
One of the first people I talked to after I got the job was Ryan Reynolds. I'm like, you coming back? He's like, get the fuck out of here.
Love the idea that Ryan Reynolds is like, oh, hell no. The other thing, too, is you've probably seen this. James Gunn currently working on the Superman movie. We're supposed to get that Superman trailer sometime really soon, too. Of course, I will do all the videos for that when they start releasing stuff. Like I said, it is CCXP weekend, so there'll probably be a couple trailers. I think the Invincible Season 3 trailer should be out later tonight, so that's probably going to be my next video. Make sure to enable alerts.
Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.